Photo illustration by The Globe and Mail. Images, Chris Wattie, Reuters, Dave Chan, The Globe and Mail, Chris Donovan, The Canadian Press. Kathleen, Wynne and Andrea Horwath are campaigning in Southwestern Ontario on Tuesday as the Liberals are ramping up pressure on the NDP, questioning the math behind their election platform. On Monday, the Liberals claimed to have found a costing error in the NDP platform, claiming among other things that it defunds hundreds of millions for apprenticeships, women's shelters and other programs. I think the NDP believes that the things they've left out are important. But the fact is they're not included in their plan, Ms. Wynne said at a Toronto event. There's no way when you look at their plan to be able to discern how they would pay for them, Ms. Horwath countered that the numbers were accurate and that the Liberals' criticism was pretty dishonest. She also ruled out the possibility of a coalition between the two left-wing parties to keep Doug Ford's progressive Conservatives out of power. I am unequivocally saying I have no interest in partnering up with that party, Ms. Horwath said. Mr. Ford's campaign announced Monday that a PC government, if elected, would cancel some business support programs but keep others. Mr. Ford is running on a promise to lower corporate income taxes by 1 percentage point. Monday also saw the release of the Green Party's full platform, which promised a 100% renewable energy supply by 2050 and a $4.2 billion green building and business fund to encourage energy conservation. Time until election countdown. Kevin Van Possen, The Globe and Mail, age 64, writing, Don Valley West background. 5 years ago, Ms. Wynne was a pioneer when she became Ontario's first female premier, helping the Liberals to shake off a reputation for mismanagement inherited from her predecessor, Dalton McGuinty, and then regaining a majority government in 2014. But now, Ms. Wynne's approval rating has waned as the Liberals mark their 15th year in power. The Liberals tried to reassert its progressive credentials in March's budget, which promised billions in new spending, childcare programs and drug and dental care. That budget's slogan was, "Care and Opportunity," and care is a word you'll hear a lot in Ms. Wynne's campaign as she positions herself against Doug Ford's cut-happy conservatism. More reading, Adam Radwanski. The frighteningly high stakes facing Wynne's Liberals, Progressive Conservatives, Doug Ford. Nathan Dennett, The Canadian Press, age 53, writing, seeking election in Etobicoke North background. Until January, Ontario's Progressive Conservatives had expected Patrick Brown to lead them into the election and, perhaps, into power again. But after sexual misconduct allegations forced Mr. Brown out of office, a last-minute leadership race made Doug Ford the new boss in March. Torontonians may remember him from the tumultuous mayoralty of his younger brother, Rob Ford, whose mantra of respect for taxpayers through government cutbacks has found new life in Doug Ford's provincial campaign. But whereas the Ford's municipal populism was aimed at loosely defined adversaries, downtown elites and their gravy train, Doug Ford's provincial populism is marshalling popular resentment against a more specific target, Ms. Wynne, whom he accuses of reckless spending, and promises to audit if elected. More reading, John Ibbotson. Doug Ford is a different kind of conservative. New Democrats. Andrea Horwath. Frank Gunn, The Canadian Press, age 55, writing, Hamilton Centre background. A Labour activist and former city councillor in her hometown, Hamilton, Ms. Horwath entered provincial politics in 2004 as the MPP for Hamilton Centre. This is her third election since becoming party leader in 2009. With Ms. Horwath scoring a higher favourability rating than either of her rival leaders in recent polls, the NDP, whose campaign slogan is "Change for the Better," is trying to portray Ms. Horwath as an alternative for voters disenchanted with the Wynne government. More reading, Adam Radwanski. Ontario NDP's Andrea Horwath is on the brink of her biggest test. The issues so far, only the NDP has released a full platform, while many of the Liberals' promises can be gleaned from their March budget. The Tories had a platform under their previous leader, the People's Guarantee, but it's not clear yet how Mr. Ford will change that platform on the campaign trail. In the meantime, here are the highlights of major issues in this election. Spending background. Ontario ran steady but shrinking deficits since the late 2000s before it got back in black in 2017. But this year, the Liberal government abandoned a balanced budget pledge, offering billions in new spending on social programs and infrastructure. But the government has also come under fire for changing accounting practices at the provincial electrical regulator to erase billions of dollars in debt from the books, as documented in a Globe and Mail investigation in April. PCs, for all his promises of spending cuts, Mr. Ford has not given a clear timeline for when a PC government would balance its books, and he has said that it would run a deficit in its first year. Mr. Ford is focusing his attention on Ms. Wynne's fiscal record, promising an independent audit of the Liberals' spending. Liberals, in their 2018 budget, the Wynne Liberals argued that Ontario's economy was doing well enough to focus on social spending and infrastructure to produce greater economic growth later. The plan calls for 6 consecutive deficits, with a return to balance in 2024-25, NDP, Ms. Horwath also has no timetable for balancing the budget, and the party platform predicts 5 consecutive deficits of between $5 billion and $2 billion. Taxation background. During and after Ms. Wynne's rise to power, progressive taxation was becoming an increasingly hot topic for Canadians. In 2015, Justin Trudeau unseated Stephen Harper, promising tax cuts for the middle class and tax hikes for the rich. Soon after, Albertans elected a NDP premier vowing tax hikes for corporations and high-income earners. Now, as Ontarians get used to a host of changes in federal taxes on individuals and corporations, they are faced with widely divergent options about who the province should tax and how much. PCs, Mr. Ford plans to cut corporate income tax from 11.5% to 10.5% and phase out income tax entirely for minimum wage earners. NDP, the New Democrats have pledged to raise corporate tax rates to 13%. Under the NDP's plan, Ontarians earning more than $300,000 would see their tax rates rise by 2 percentage points, or 1 percentage point for those earning more than $220,000. Liberals, the 2018 budget simplified Ontarians' personal income tax brackets, adding $200 a year in taxes for about 1.8 million taxpayers but cutting $130 for another 680,000. The Liberals also plan to keep corporate taxes at 11.5%. Someone earning $95,000 in taxable income would pay. Liberals proposed changes. The Globe and Mail. Source: Liberals, Ontario Budget 2018. Someone earning $95,000 in taxable income would pay. Liberals proposed changes. The Globe and Mail. Source: Liberals, Ontario Budget 2018. Someone earning $95,000 in taxable income would pay $6,946 in personal income taxes. Liberals proposed changes. The Globe and Mail. Source: Liberals, Ontario Budget 2018. Education background. Teachers have long been part of the Liberals' political base, but their relationship was strained in the 2010s by labour disputes under the McGuinty and Wynne governments. Ontario's largest education union, the ETFO, has abandoned the Liberals for the first time in a decade, backing Ms. Horwath's NDP in May. The government has also come under fire from social conservatives over its sex education curriculum, which was overhauled in 2015 to address consent, gender identity and the risks of posting sexual images online. PCs, Mr. Ford has vowed to scrap the sex education curriculum in the province's Discovery Math curriculum, which focuses on creative problem-solving. He also wants to police free speech on Ontario's campuses, threatening to limit post-secondary funding to institutions deemed to be not respecting free speech. He has so far been vague on how such determinations would be made, and by whom. NDP. The NDP platform calls for $16 billion in spending over 10 years on infrastructure and repairs at Ontario's schools, capping kindergarten class sizes at 26 students and getting rid of standardized EQAO testing, which the party argues forced teachers to teach to the test, instead of focusing on children. At the post-secondary level, the NDP wants to give OSAP-qualified students non-repayable grants instead of loans. Liberals. In their budget, the Liberals promise new measures to modernize the curriculum and assessment schools from kindergarten to grade 12, and planned $3 billion in capital grants to post-secondary institutions over 10 years. Ms. Wynne is also defending the Liberals' overhaul of the sex education curriculum. Childcare background. Childcare rates in Ontario cities have risen rapidly in recent years. In some areas, families can expect to pay $20,000 a year, and Toronto is the most expensive city in the country. But Ontario's major parties diverge widely about whether some families should pay more than others. NDP. Ms. Horwath proposes an income-based scale for childcare. Families earning less than $40,000 annually would get childcare for free, wealthy families would pay more, and the average for all Ontarians would work out to $12 a day. Liberals. Watchie's budget offered free childcare for all Ontarians aged 2.5 to junior kindergarten age, regardless of income. PCs. The Progressive Conservatives have promised a sliding scale of tax rebates, providing up to $6,750 per child under 15 and giving low-income families as much as 75% of their childcare costs. Transit and infrastructure background. A Ford brother talking excitedly about subways. Subways is a familiar sight for Torontonians, who saw Rob Ford's administration tear up the previous mayor's transit policy, scuttle an LRT system to Scarborough and choose a more expensive subway there instead. Keeping up with Toronto's shifting plans has been a priority for the Ontario government, but it's not the only one. Ottawa and Kitchener-Waterloo are on track for long-awaited light rail networks, and Hamilton voted last year to move forward with a divisive $1 billion LRT plan. Liberals. The 2018 budget offers $79 billion for various public transit projects over 14 years, including a Toronto to Windsor high-speed rail line, light rail expansion in Ottawa and cost reductions for GO Transit users. NDP. An NDP government would cover 50% of municipal transit's operating cost, build the downtown relief line in Toronto and create two-way all-day GO rail service between Toronto and Kitchener-Waterloo. PCs. Mr. Ford has pledged an extra $5 billion for new subways in Toronto, would prioritize the downtown relief line and would revise the planned subway expansion to the Scarborough town centre from 1 stop to 3 stops. Hydro background. Ontarians' electricity rates have soared since the province phased out its coal-fired power plants, and Ms. Wynne made bringing the rates down a personal priority. But cutting rates meant Ontario had to borrow billions of dollars to make up for lost revenue, creating debt that it then concealed through new accounting practices. Liberals. Ms. Wynne is standing by the Fair Hydro plan unveiled in 2017, which uses borrowed money to cut rates by 25%. The Liberals are also sticking to their plan to sell off 60% of Hydro One to private shareholders. PCs. Mr. Ford has promised to cut rates 12%, in addition to the Liberals' 25% cut, but it's unclear how the PCs plan to make up the shortfall. He also wants to fire Hydro One CEO and board, blaming them for high rates. NDP, the New Democrats would bring Hydro One back into public hands, cut hydro bills by 30% and end time-of-day pricing. Environment background: Ontario emits more greenhouse gases than any province except oil-producing Alberta, and under Ms. Wynne's government, the province took major steps to change that. In 2015, the province committed to a cap-and-trade system with Quebec and California and vowed to cut emissions to 37% below 1990 levels by 2030. Months later, the newly elected Trudeau government signed on to ambitious reduction targets at the Paris Climate Conference, but getting provincial premiers to sign on to a national carbon pricing plan was difficult. Saskatchewan in particular was strongly opposed to new taxes on carbon. After years of political deadlock, the federal government announced a national framework last year and legislation this past January, essentially vowing that any province without its own suitable carbon pricing scheme would have one imposed on it in 2019. Liberals. In April, the Liberals announced $1.7 billion over 3 years to give Ontarians rebates and programs to retrofit their homes for energy efficiency. NDP. An NDP government would use at least 25% of the cap-and-trade system's revenue to help northern, rural and low-income Ontarians adapt to a lower carbon lifestyle, and use $50 million to a home efficiency retrofit program. PCs. Mr. Ford wants to repeal cap-and-trade and oppose the federally mandated minimum price on emissions. Who's trying to persuade you? And why elections are a time to think critically about the messages you see in TV ads, at debates and in the news media, but make sure you're watching your Facebook feed too. The Globe, in partnership with U.S. journalism nonprofit ProPublica, has been studying the ways that campaigns and outside political entities are micro-targeting Ontario's voters. If you want to help us learn more, hear about how to install a browser extension designed by ProPublica and what we're doing with the information, here are some of the trends emerging so far. Progressive media entities such as North 99 targeting controversial progressive conservative candidates. Social conservatives doing damage control for Tanya Granick-Allen, an activist dumped by Mr. Ford as a PC candidate. Unions pushing harder for the NDP. Older, married and male voters being micro-targeted by the Tories. Liberals running hyperlocal ads about riding-level nominees. A sample of one of the targeted Facebook ads gathered in the Globe's investigation with ProPublica. The Globe and Mail. How to vote. Am I registered? If you're an 18-year-old Canadian citizen who lives in Ontario, you're eligible to vote. Check Elections Ontario's registration website to get on the voters list, or update your information if you've moved since the last election in 2014. Who am I voting for? There are 124 ridings in Ontario, and some of them may have changed names and boundaries since the previous election. You can search here by postal code to find your riding and the local candidates. When do I vote? Election day is June 7th, but there are ways to vote in advance between May 26th and June 1st, or by special ballot if you're out of the province. Here's how to do that. Where and how do I vote? Registered voters will be sent cards in the mail explaining where their polling stations are on election day. When you go there, you'll be asked to show your card and a piece of ID. Here are the guidelines for what kinds of identification they'll accept. Can I take a selfie of my ballot? No, sorry. Elections Ontario doesn't allow that. When do we know who wins? Polls close at 9 p.m. ET. This is Ontario's first election to use electronic voting machines, which could considerably speed up the ballot counting process. Check back at globeandmail.com for up-to-date coverage of the official results. Commentary and analysis. Adam Radwanski, Horwath shines through rivals' hostilities in Ontario election debate. Campbell Clark, for Justin Trudeau, a Doug Ford win in Ontario might have a silver lining. Marcus G. Ford's plan for Toronto Transit doesn't add up. Editorial. Doug Ford wants to scrap Ontario's sex ed curriculum. Has he read it? With reports from Globe staff and the Canadian press.